guys can have a seat. It's really good to see you guys here. And what we've been doing as a church is we've been going through this series called Upside Down. And what we've been doing for the past few weeks is looking at Jesus' most famous teaching in the Sermon on the Mount and looking at what he taught in that and really the basics of it, which really, the reason we're going through this is no matter who you are, no matter where you are in your relationship with God and your journey of following Jesus, whether you are here and you identify as a follower of Jesus, or maybe you're here and you're someone who's just exploring, trying to figure out who God is, what he's all about, what he wants to do with your life, or maybe you're someone who's just kind of skeptical, like, I don't know if God is real, I don't know what he's all about, if he is real. The reason we're going through this series called Upside Down, because it really helps us see what Jesus brought and what God's values and character and his mission is all about. Really, the basics of this is this Sermon on the Mount could be kind of classified as Christianity 101. It's the basics of who God is, what his values are, and what impact he wants to do through his followers on this planet. So we've been going through that, and it's been really beneficial for us no matter where we are on our journey. And we have 2 weeks left, and what we've started with is looking at his values and seeing how God's values are completely different than the world's values. It's not about pride, but it's about gentleness and meekness. It's not about having it all figured out, but knowing we don't have it all figured out, and we need God in our lives, and going through those values. And by living out those values, it's going to lead us to have this influence on this world that completely flips it upside down like Jesus started. And in doing so, what it actually does is it puts everything right side up with how God designed us to function on this earth. And then what Jesus started doing is he started, after looking at the values and the impact, he started kind of looking at these different topics that all of us deal with in life, whether that be worry or things like how we do our religious activities, because everyone deals with that in some way, shape, or form. We deal with faith, whether we believe in God or not. That's part of who we are, whether we believe in God or we don't believe in God. Both of those takes an effort of faith on our part and how we live that out. And so Jesus addresses those things. And then he starts talking about something we're going to talk about today, which is a fun topic, and that's judging people. Now, raise your hand if you like being judged. All right, cool. Maybe a few of you with that, but I don't. And you're probably thinking if you're a guest here, oh, I picked the worst week to come right now. We're talking about judging people. But I promise you, we're going to dig into this together, and this is going to benefit all of us because what Jesus has to say may flip your view on him and your view on what we do in this situation, maybe upside down, but puts it right side up. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of being judged. I hate it. Now, on the flip side, I'm awesome at judging other people. Like, it's a gift that I have in my life that I can look at someone and I can judge them, whether it's verbally or in my head or things like that. But if someone judges me, that's pretty messed up in my book because you don't know me, man. Like, that's not something you should do. Like, when it comes to driving, okay? I've realized that I have an issue with judging people when they drive. And actually, there are people, a friend of mine, Jess, who was singing up here today, she knows I won't voluntarily get into a car that she's driving, because I think she's the worst driver on the face of the planet. Now, she knows this. I'm not like saying something new to you guys that she doesn't know. She knows this. I'm very open about this. But I tend to judge other people's driving skills. And so here, living in Pittsburgh, especially the South Hills, moving back here from Milwaukee, where I lived for almost 8 years, driving is a little simpler out there. They have like grids in their city. It's really simple. But here in the South Hills, whoever created our roads here, there was no system to it. It's like, hey, there's this hill. Let's just wrap around it somehow. We'll get around it. It's no big deal. And so now we have all these awkward, narrow roads around here in Pittsburgh, and it causes weird driving situations to take place. And I'm driving, and I see people who mess up, who aren't paying attention, or whatever it may be, and I instantly am like, what are you doing? And I'm like, waving my arms in the car like now. I'm getting angry at them. They can't even hear me, but I'm like verbalizing why they're such a bad driver. And if I've done that to you, I apologize. That's just part of my brokenness. I'm trying to figure it out. But I judge them and their driving skills, and that's just what I do. But if someone ever like yells at me or beefs their horn at me because I messed up, you know what? They've really just missed the point now, because who are they to judge me? They don't know what's going on in my life. They don't know that I'm running late to a meeting. They don't know that my 3 kids are fighting and throwing things and screaming in the back of my van right now. They don't know what's going on, so who are they to judge me? But again, I'll judge them. Or when I see somebody with, driving and they're looking at their phone and they're driving, I'll look at them and instantly I'm like, you're going to get somebody killed, man. What are you doing? But there's no way I ever mess with my phone on my phone, is there? Or in the car, right? Actually, yeah, there is. I've done that, and I'll confess I've done that. It's not a smart thing to do, and I'm not saying it's a good thing to do, but you know what? I justify it by saying, man, you need the right song in your playlist while you're driving. Again, not a good excuse. But what I do is I'll judge people for something I struggle with myself, but I don't mind judging them, but I'll get offended if someone judges me. My point is while I'm good at judging others, I don't like doing it and getting judged myself, and that's probably true for all of us here today. We all have opinions on things, so when we see someone doing something that doesn't go with our opinion or our viewpoint or our worldview, it can be a natural reaction for us to cast judgment on that person with a comment, with a look, or even just a simple thought in our head. None of us, though, enjoy being called out for anything we do ourselves. It's not fun, it's not comfortable, and we don't like it. Even if we did something wrong, it's still not something we want or enjoy in life. And whether we are giving judgment or receiving it, it can cause a lot of tension in our relationships. It can impact our mood. It can cause stress. It can put strain on our relationships at home or at work or just out in the community, wherever we may be. And this thing of casting judgment on others can really impact the life that you and I live. So how do we handle it? Do we just not critique or call somebody out for anything? Do we just live and let live and not worry about what other people say and what they do? Or do we just live our own lives ignoring people's judgments and critiques of us? Thankfully, in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he addresses this. He talks about judgment. But as always with Jesus, what he gets to is he gets down to the point of it, what the reason of it is. And he takes this deeper that's more than just our outward action. It's really just about more of our heart. Because it's out of our hearts that our true actions and our true purposes come out. And so in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he starts off with the values like I mentioned. And this will have significant influence in our world, but he continually, in the Sermon on the Mount, what he does is he addresses the heart of the matter. And how when it comes to following him, it's not so much about how good we are with our outward actions. It's about how much our hearts long for to know and follow Jesus. And what that's going to do is going to transform us to be the follower that Jesus loves and what he wants to bring out of us, because that's going to help us in our lives flip upside down and help us flip the lives of others around us upside down and put them all right side up. So after teaching all these things, he gets down to this topic. He talks about judgment, and which was a big deal in that culture, just like it was in this culture. You guys ever notice how we're really good at judging other people now in our culture? If you don't, just sign on to Facebook, because that's what we do. That's all we ever do on Facebook, it seems like. We judge other people for different things, whether it's right or wrong or indifferent. We jump into that type of a culture. And Jesus addresses this then, and it's still impactful for us today. And what he does in his teaching on judgment is he says 3 different statements about it. Kind of 3 separate things that kind of make up his overall viewpoint of this idea of judgment. And in those judgments, there's 3 tensions that can come out of us, for you and I to wrestle with. And that's what we're going to do today. Look at these 3 statements, look at these tensions, and see how they relate to our lives as we move forward from here. And understanding Jesus' teaching here is so important and so beneficial for us no matter who we are, no matter where we're at on our relationship journey with God, whether we believe in him or not. This is so good for all of us to dive into today. The first thing Jesus says in Matthew 7, verses 1 through 2, he says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." And so Jesus starts off this section by saying, do not judge or you too will be judged. And let me just say, this is one of the most favorite verses of people on this planet, whether you believe in God or not. Because when we get judged, the first thing we like to say to each other is, hey man, Jesus says don't judge. Kind of gives us a get out of jail free card, like you can't judge me, Jesus says don't judge me. That's a big deal for us. Like I've used that before, other people I've known have used it. We like that verse because it really helps us think, oh, I can do what I want and no one can judge me for it. And so Jesus starts off with that, but all too often this verse is thrown out and it's used in an incorrect way. Because here's why. The word that Jesus uses for judging here in the original language, it can mean a couple of different things. It can mean to analyze or evaluate or critique culture, okay? The issue is here, Jesus isn't using it in that situation here, because all throughout Jesus' life, we see Jesus analyzing, critiquing, walking into people's lives saying, hey, the way you're living right now, this isn't the way God designed you to be. There's a better way. There's a more fruitful way. There's a more content way. And I want to show you what that means. And Jesus would do that with lots of different people. He did that with the religious leaders of the day that were very prideful. They were deceitful. And Jesus would go to them and say, this is not what God calls you to do. And he would call them out for that. He would also go to his closest friends. Some of the issues of his closest friends, his apostles, they had pride issues. And they were all about who is the next best one after Jesus. Who wanted to be number one after Jesus in line of like ranking of who was the holiest or who was the best follower and trust of God. And they would always argue about that. Who was the best in God's kingdom after Jesus? And Jesus would call his friends out and goes, guys, you are missing the point here. This is not what God is calling you to do. So Jesus would critique and analyze and call out culture and people in his day. So he's not saying that here. What he's saying, the way he's using this word is to condemn somebody else. That we're not called to condemn other people. It wasn't about analyzing or evaluating the situation. It was about condemning people and their actions. It was about not casting this judgment to declare their status with God. By saying, because you're living that way, God hates you, God despites you, God wants nothing to do with it. That is not our place, that is not our right, and that is what Jesus is getting at in this situation. We're called to analyze, critique, and that's part of what it looks like to follow Jesus, but our role is to never cast this condemnation type judgment on anybody, whether it's a stranger, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member. And this creates this first tension that we have to wrestle with here, and that's calling out versus condemning. Jesus says don't judge, but that judgment he teaches is against the judgment of condemnation. When people condemn, that same judgment gets cast on us because we are not the judge and jury on people's relationships with God. What we're called to do, what people are called to do when they follow Jesus is to reflect who God is, follow Jesus with how he calls us to live with the same values, with the same influence, with the same way of living that he calls us to in the Sermon on the Mount. And that's going to reflect to others who God is. And we can analyze that and call that out and say, hey, this is not how God designed you to live. But our role here is not to judge others on their relationship with God. Because all of us here are all trying to figure it out. We don't have it all put together. Galatians 6:1 says, brothers and sisters, Paul writes this, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. You see, a life following Jesus gives us a mission to help people explore, to know, and to follow Jesus. This means that we will have to go to them with love and grace and boldness to call them out if they're doing things that don't honor God and don't honor other people. Let me put it in just, an example. If someone treats their spouse or their kids poorly, or if someone is making some ethically questionable decisions at work, or if someone is indulging in a lifestyle that is unhealthy and dangerous, wouldn't the loving thing to do to be enter into that relationship with them to help them through it? I think all of us would say absolutely. Absolutely. That's the loving thing to do. Does that mean we have to be bold in calling them out? Yeah, it takes some courage, it takes some faith, it takes some boldness. But does that also mean that we have to do it in a way with gentleness and love? Absolutely. That's what Paul is writing here. That's what Jesus taught, that when we call out, when we critique, when we analyze other people, we go to them with love and boldness, but we do it with gentleness because that's the loving thing to do. But by no means do we just let it go. Like if you saw me abusing one of my children, which I wouldn't do, but if I did that, I would hope someone would definitely enter into my life at that point and say, that's not cool. That's not how you treat your kids. That's not how God calls you to lead your kids. I need people in my life to call me out on that. They don't just let me do that. That's not how God's calling us to live. And that's the same thing for us when we have those relationships with people who are doing things and struggling with things in life. We don't just let it go. We don't condemn them and God, but we also go into their lives to critique, to say, hey, God has a better way for living. And so we make sure we do that. We also have to make sure when we call people out, when we have loved ones say, we need to do something about what you're doing here, we don't move into that category of condemnation because we don't have the authority to make that call. We don't have the power to play judge, jury, and executioner. That's not our role. That's not our right. Followers of Jesus should call out, just to be clear, but never condemn. And there is a big difference between the two. In fact, we see that in the way Jesus led his life. There was a moment that's recorded in the book of John chapter 8 in the Bible. And what happened is Jesus' ministry is getting really popular at this point, and he's flipping everything upside down with the way he's living, with the way he's teaching. And the religious leaders hated Jesus because he was taking all the attention away from them, and they were realizing, oh man, we're losing our power, we're losing our significance, we're losing our status. We need to get this guy in trouble. So what they did is they caught this woman who was in the middle of committing adultery. Could you imagine this scene playing out? She's in the middle of having an adulterous relationship with this other guy, and she grabs the woman. They don't grab the guy to bring along with her. They just grab this woman, and they put her at Jesus and say, hey, this woman's been caught in adultery. By our law, she is supposed to be stoned to death. What say you, Jesus? So Jesus is in this situation because based off the Jewish law, she should be stoned to death because that's the punishment for committing adultery. And here's Jesus who didn't come to condemn. He came to love and show people the way to have a right relationship with God. And so what Jesus does in this situation is he starts getting down, he starts teaching, and then he starts writing in the dirt. And we don't know what he's writing. All we know is the guys, the religious leaders who were there with stones ready to kill this woman, they start dropping their stones and walking away. Because Jesus tells them, you who are without sin, yeah, go ahead, cast the first stone. But he's saying there, you've all messed up. You're not different from her. So yeah, if you're perfect, go ahead. By the law, then she should be condemned to die. And they all walk away. And Jesus goes to this woman, and she goes, where are those who condemn you? And she goes, there's no one left. And Jesus, the one person who's perfect in this situation, who's without sin, tells her, I don't condemn you either. Now go and leave your life of sin. What's amazing is in this moment is Jesus loves this woman. And he teaches the people around her, like, your role here is not to condemn her to die. And he goes to this woman and he critiques her. He analyzes her saying, listen, the life you're living isn't healthy. This isn't the right life that God's calling you to. And he tells her, go leave your life of sin. But I'm not condemning you. And there's grace here. There's mercy here. There's forgiveness here. There's love. And this woman gets this new lease on life. Jesus showed her that no one had the ability or the right to condemn her to death. And he wasn't going to do it either. And so maybe there's someone in your life that you have to maybe practice this with. Maybe it's a family member or a friend or a coworker. Maybe they're doing things in life that are leading down to a bad path. And as a follower of Jesus, or just simply someone who loves them, you have the responsibility to lovingly and gently go to them to help them, to call them out and say, hey, there's a better way. In doing so, maybe you'll get to know them better, understand them better, and as a result, you'll know how to help them better. Now, let me be clear. With any of this, it takes this step to go to someone with the intention of calling them out. It has to be done with gentleness and love. It doesn't help to come up and say, hey, you're being stupid right now. You're messing up your life. Stop doing that. There has to be love there. There has to be grace there. That's what Jesus taught. That's what Jesus showed. We don't come at them abruptly and harshly. We go to them with how we would want them to come to us. That's something we have to think through, is how do we want someone to come to us in those situations? Because we all have people in our lives, and some of those people will live in ways that don't honor God, that don't honor other people. And we have the opportunity to love them and encourage them back to how God calls them to live. And so if you're ever going to do that, I'm going to encourage you should, because of love for that other person. But I want you to make sure we pay attention to the next thing Jesus says before we ever do that. He says this in Matthew 7:3-5. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And so what this does, this creates this tension of this, we'll call it the speck versus the plank. We're not going to get creative. This is what Jesus says. Now, something we don't always see if we're ever reading the Bible or looking at the Bible together like we are right now is Jesus was actually a really funny guy. Like, we always look at Jesus as like, he's the guy with the long curly hair. He's always looking up to heaven and praying, like this really pious and righteous guy, right? That's how that's how Jesus is portrayed. But Jesus was a human. Like, he had jokes, and he created laughter, and when he taught, he created laughter amongst the crowd. And here in this situation, maybe it doesn't translate to our humor in our culture, but people would have been laughing a lot at what Jesus is saying here. He's like, listen, guys, you're so worried about this little piece of dust in your brother's eye that you don't even see the big piece of wood that's sticking out of your own eye. And he's using this exaggeration that people are laughing at because they know uncomfortably it's the truth. So often we get so worked up about other people's stuff that we miss the brokenness in our own lives. And what Jesus is saying here is, remember, he's not saying not to go to people and call them out and help them, but first we should be critical and analyze our own lives. If we're going to help other people with what's going on in their lives, we first have to be focused on who we are and what we're doing in our own lives personally. We often get way more upset at other people's actions over our own. It's much easier to critique and call out other people. Let's just be honest. It's actually more fun that way too. That's why Jesus used this illustration. But the problem is, what we tend to do is we tend to judge ourselves on our motives, and we tend to judge other people on their actions. And there's a key difference there. You see, I'll judge other people on their actions when they're driving, for instance. They've messed up, they're not paying attention. There's the horrible human being who can't drive. But if I mess up driving, I'm going to initially judge myself on my motives. And I'll think to myself, you know what, well, I was distracted by this, or my kids were crying in the back, or I don't know where I'm going. I'll think of my motives here to give me an excuse of why my actions are way less impactful than what the other person's actions are. And that's what we do, is we look at their actions and judge them by that. And we look at our motives and judge ourselves by that. It kind of gives us like this get out of jail free card. The funny thing is normally when we get mad at other people for their actions, the thing that upsets us is something that we struggle with ourselves. So use my driving illustration, for instance. That probably means I struggle with driving sometimes too. For example, when someone gets upset that someone gets angry at them, they may have anger issues themselves. John Stott, who is a former pastor and is a major faith influencer in America for decades, he said this about this topic. He says, we have a rosy view of ourselves and a jaundiced view of others. Indeed, what we are often doing is seeing our own faults in others and judging them vicariously. That way, we experience the pleasure of self-righteousness without the pain of penitence. And what we do is we look for our own faults in other people, and we judge them for it, and it makes us feel better about ourselves. And we're missing the plank in our eye while we're focusing on the speck in theirs. And that's what Jesus is getting at here. The person we should be calling out and critiquing the most is ourselves. We should be exploring and testing our motives and desires in every area of our lives. We should be asking, is what I'm doing and is what I want to do showing my love for God and other people, or is it only showing love for myself? You see, a follower of Jesus should call out the sin and brokenness of those around them, but they should first look at our own sin and brokenness in our own lives. First, this will help us follow Jesus better. We won't be blinded by our own struggles, but it will give us more credibility to those when we do go to them in love and say, hey, there's a better way. When we critique ourselves, when we go to people, all of a sudden we don't go to them with this mentality of, hey, I'm better than you, or I'm greater than you, or I'm smarter than you, which tends to happen sometimes. Instead, we'll go to them by saying, hey, I know what you're going through because I've been there too, and here's a better way. It goes with love, it goes with gentleness, it goes with the way of Jesus. It also gives us a better understanding of God's grace and forgiveness in our own lives. And we can pass that to other people's lives as well. You see, when we humbly look at ourselves before going to others, it's going to change the way we interact with others. It starts with us. So before we go to anybody else, let's make sure we are looking at our own lives too. And the third thing Jesus says on judgment is in Matthew 7:6. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under your feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And I call this tension, this is a weird one, purposeful versus wasteful. You see, here Jesus brings some balance to his teaching on judgment. He says he says we're not to condemn others, but there is a place to call out morality and ethics and following God. However, there will be people that want nothing to do with God. They want nothing to do with who he is or exploring him, and that's okay because that's where they're at right now. But in those situations, in those relationships that we have, maybe those aren't the people that we have to be going to call out. Instead, we have to be looking at them with love and grace and just building that friendship to show them who God is first. Because a lot of times what we can do is we can kind of get overzealous in how we call people out. We get mad at them for their views on something or their actions on something or the way they do something, whatever that may be. And we can get really quick to pull the trigger on us going to them and saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. The problem is they may not be ready to hear it from us. Number one, we may not have the relationship collateral with them for us to have that right to say something to them. One, they may not be in the mood to listen to it for whatever reason, whatever's going on in their lives. And what Jesus is saying here is be careful in how you do this. Because you have this amazing truth. You have this amazing ability to show who God is to other people. But sometimes they don't want to listen to it. If they don't, it's like throwing these precious pearls and letting pigs just trample on them. Now, he wasn't calling people pigs, but he was calling the culture out because what the Jews thought is other people who weren't part of the Jewish culture, they viewed them as unclean individuals just like they viewed dogs and pigs in that culture. And Jesus is saying here, there are some people that aren't ready to listen. They're not ready for the truth. But maybe we have to love them and build a relationship with them and build them up. There's a key there because later on in Jesus' ministry and after Jesus' death and resurrection, his hope, his grace and love was for everybody, even everyone outside of the Jewish faith. So those people the Jews viewed as dogs and pigs, they had the grace that God was giving them too. So Jesus says this to them. So we have to start thinking for us through these moments of when we can be purposeful with our conversations with people and when it's wasteful. Sometimes it's not the time or place to even have the conversation. But sometimes there is, and we have to be paying attention to when there's a purposeful conversation to be had or a wasteful one. We have to make sure that there's a relationship there first that is built on trust between the two people. And in that, we'll know that they're open to hearing the things that maybe God wants us to say to them. If someone isn't open to the conversation, honestly, just don't force it. That's a simple way for us to think about it. Just don't force it. Sometimes they're not ready for it. It's important for us to know and have that relationship awareness to be purposeful with these conversations moving forward. On the flip side, we have to make sure that we ourselves are open to conversations. We have to make sure that we're open to other people coming into our lives and speaking hard truths to us. So I want you to think about this. Who are the people in your life right now? Hopefully you know them. If you don't, then maybe that's a problem right now in your life. Who are the people that you know and you trust and you've given permission to come speak into your life if you're messing up? It's so key for us to have those people in our lives. Who are those people in our lives? And if you don't have those people, I'd highly suggest you think about it, you pray about it, but also I want you to go and give them permission by saying, hey, I trust you, I love you, I know you love me. You have permission to speak this into my life if I'm messing up or if I'm missing something. For me, I have some friends who do that. My wife does that really well. And even though I don't like hearing it, I never like hearing it, and my first reaction is to get defensive. I also know when they come do that to me, I know they love me in that, and I can trust them in that. So we have to make sure that we're prepared ourselves to receive that critique. You see, this idea of judgment has been a little misconstrued in our culture. By no means do we just let each other do whatever we want and not step in. This would be madness, because if there's brokenness in the world, we should do something to fix it. But what Jesus teaches here is that the idea of having tough conversations when it comes to how we are living and acting in life is really about our heart when it comes to how we deal with those relationships that we have. It's about our desire for the people in our lives. Do we want to help them or do we just want to be right? Because it seems that our biggest problem in our culture today is we spend a lot of time yelling and screaming and posting on Facebook, whatever it may be, our desire to be right rather than having conversations with people, to love them, to see what's going on in their lives first. And really, that's the thing we have to pay attention to. Are we worried about building them up or breaking them down? And that's the one thing I want us to walk away with today, is this. The one thing is, a life following Jesus looks to build each other up and not break each other down. That's when it comes to this idea of judgment and how we have these relationships with other people. This gets down to the heart of the matter. Do we have a true desire to follow Jesus ourselves and to help others do the same? If so, then our hearts should be about lovingly building each other up for them to know God better. It's not about beating them down into submission. It's about giving grace and mercy to show people how much God loves them. 1 Thessalonians, Paul writes, therefore encourage one another and build each other up just in fact that you are doing. And the writer of Hebrews says in 10, 24 and 25, he says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. You see, these were written by followers of Jesus, and it shows they understood what Jesus was talking about and what he was all about. They didn't let each other just do what they wanted to do, but rather they looked to build and encourage each other into following Jesus better. They didn't condemn, but they didn't just sit back and let everything just take place and not do nothing about it. And this is the reason it's so important for us to know this, because this is what God is all about. This is how God treats us. The reason we treat other people this way, because this is how God came into our lives first. You see, too often, I don't know how this is with you, we have this image of God that he's just some angry God looking to punish or condemn for us for screwing up or failing in life, which we all do. We do something good, then God's happy. But if we do something bad, then God's angry with us. And he's up there and he's smiling and he's frowning and he's angry. It's this mixed thing. And we're trying to, if we act good enough, then maybe we're good enough for God. But if we mess up, man, God's angry with us now. And so it's this relationship that's based off of our behavior rather than the love that God has for that. And so because of this, God becomes this angry person in the sky, judging us, and if we don't do the right things, he'll never be happy with us. This is common today, and it was common in Jesus' day. People view God as this disappointed parent who was never pleased with them. So the way they treated themselves and each other was by saying, do better, act better, be better. And they lived with this mentality that just put all this burden on them by thinking, I have to live up to all these expectations and all these rules, and they just couldn't do it, and they just felt beat down because of it. They would tear each other down thinking this way. And this is how they got everyone to think this is how God reacts to them. But Jesus flipped it upside down. In fact, when he came to this earth, he sat down with this religious leader and told him this. Hopefully that he would go teach other people this. He says in John 3:16 and 17, a lot of us know 16 where it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life, which is awesome. It sounds amazing. But 17, I think, is just as important for us. He says, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And that's what we have to see here. God didn't send Jesus out of this disappointment for us, but out of his love for us. God didn't send Jesus to condemn us, but to save us. God didn't come to break you down, to build you up, to have this better life. He came to build you up because of the life he gave you through Jesus. That is how God views you, and that is how God has treated you. And maybe you've never heard that before in your life, and I want to make sure you hear that now. God's view of you isn't some view of disappointment and anger because of your screw-ups or your failures or your brokenness and the baggage in your life. His view of you is of love and of grace, so much so that he sent his son to come and die for you, to rescue you, so you could have and experience and live out the life that God wanted to give you. This is why it's so important for us to understand this whole judging thing, because this is how God treated us first. Because the way God treated us, now we go and treat others the same way. It's out of love, not disappointment, that we go to them to help them know and follow Jesus. It's for saving, not condemnation, that we go to them. It's to build them up and not break them down. And so who are the people that you need to go to and have a conversation maybe this week or moving forward? Better yet, what's the log in your eye that maybe you need to focus on? And if you don't know what it is, ask a spouse or a close friend, because I guarantee you they know. It's true. Or who do you need to go to and apologize and seek forgiveness from for not treating them this way? Because it's so important for us to get this and live this out, because this is what it means to live upside down. See, our lives are full of people who want nothing to do with God and church, because they view it as something where they are judged, and that we're it's just a place full of hypocrites. And part of that's true, because guess what? I'm a hypocrite. We've all screwed up. But part of this is because they're misunderstanding of who God is. And maybe part of it's because of how they've been mistreated by other Christians before. And maybe that's how you feel. But we need to flip that upside down starting this morning. We need to see and live out the way that God has treated us to other people. We call out, but we don't condemn. And we check for the log in our own eye before worrying about the speck in theirs. And we go with purpose and not waste, with the opportunity to love them, to guide them, to give them grace. We build them up and we don't tear them down. See, this world needs more of that more than ever before, because right now, what we seem to be doing is just tear each other apart. The world needs more building up through the love of Jesus, because this is how God treated us, and this is how God treats everybody. We need to show them that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask some people, Tony and Corey in the back, if you guys maybe come and get the communion and pass it out. We're going to take communion together now. Normally what we do together is, you guys can come pass the communion out now if you guys want. What we normally do is we have a song to reflect on that, but what I want us to do together is just right now focus on taking communion together. Because it's in communion that we are reminded of how God treats us. It's in communion, Corey, throw me one of those. It's in communion that we remember who God is and what he did through his son, Jesus. It's here that we realize that we weren't condemned, but we were saved. Now, the communion, if you're new here, what we have is there's two layers. There's a thin layer on top where the bread is, and then there's a thicker layer where the juice is. And what we'll do in a moment, we'll take this together. But God loved us so much that he didn't condemn us, that he saved his son to rescue us, to save us. And his ultimate act of that is by Jesus giving up his life on the cross for us. And it's there that we receive grace and forgiveness, and all of us have that gift that God's giving us if we choose to accept it. So I'm going to ask you guys to take out the bread, because we remember together that Jesus' body was broken and given up for us. We can take the bread together. And you can open up the part of the juice. And the juice represents Jesus' blood that was shed for us as a ransom for our payment to have a relationship back with God. We can take the juice. And the reason we do that together each week as a church is because it's us as an opportunity to be one and be reminded of who God is and what Jesus has done for us. And so what's going to happen is I want you to reflect off that. Think about in communion how much you were loved, how much God came to rescue you, came to save you, not condemn you. And I want you to think about other people in your life. And that same love that God has for you, he has for them too. The question is, do they know that? And maybe it's our responsibility to go to those relationships to remind them of that. So when you walked in today, you should have gotten this little card that says, who am I building up? And there's 5 spots here. And what's going to happen over the next few moments is I'm going to give all of us an opportunity to kind of sit and reflect on this idea for a moment. And I want you to think about the people in your lives and who are the people, who are the families, who are the couples that you know that you have relationships with, that you could say, you know what, maybe God's given me opportunity to build them up, to love them, to show them grace, to show them who God is. And what I want you to do is this. I want you over the next few minutes is think about this, pray about this, and I want you to write down 5 names. They could be your family members, they can be neighbors, they can be coworkers, they can be the barista maybe you know at the coffee shop you go to every time. It's someone that you know, that you're going to come in contact with on a consistent basis. And if you write their names down, here's what I'm going to encourage us to do. Put this somewhere where you'll see it every day. Maybe it's in your wallet. Or maybe you put it by your computer at work or somewhere at home where every day you're going to see these names. I want you to think about, and in those moments, pray for those 5 people. And I want you to be purposeful with those relationships moving forward, making sure you're looking for ways to talk to them each week. Maybe it's making sure you go out of your way at work to say hi to them, see how they're doing, see how their week's gone. Maybe it's making sure you have lunch with them. Or maybe you're making sure you invite them over for dinner at your place every once in a while. You guys go out to get coffee together, whatever that may be. You're investing in them. Or maybe it's an opportunity for you to simply say, hey, you know what? I'm part of this new church. It's kind of crazy. There's a few people coming. We're getting this thing going. It's crazy called One Church. I'd love for you to come join me one time. In fact, there's a cool week that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Next week's Memorial Day. We'll be here. Don't worry. But the next week, the first weekend of June, we're starting a brand new series. And to kick it off, I have a really good friend of mine who's coming. His name's Ethan. He'll be teaching that day. So you want to hear me that week, which is awesome. Ethan is a guy that has been on this exploration of who God is and what God wants to do in his life. So much so that he went through this crazy journey. He's just sharing more about this. Last summer, he hiked the entire Appalachian Trail as part of this search of, okay, what is he doing in life and what does God want to do with him? So he walked for 2,100 miles, which is a lot of walking. He's going to be here to share part of his journey with us. And I'm going to encourage you guys to be here that week. I'm going to encourage you guys to invite people that week. It's going to be so cool to hear Ethan's story. That's that first Sunday of June. So these 5 names you're going to write down, invite them. If they have a church, let them stay that part of that church. That's awesome there too. But if they don't have a church, invite them to come join you. And let's see what it looks like to live out this idea of judgment the way Jesus calls us to. As a way of love and grace and not an act of condemnation. So Ben's going to play a little bit, and then he's going to lead us in one more song once we're kind of done praying through these names. And then use this time to really think, okay, because of how God treated me, this is how I treat them. Let's use that time. Let's pray. God, thanks so much for this morning and a chance to gather together. God, thank you for the people in this room. And God, we're all different. We've all come from different places with different aspects of our understanding of you, God. And God, help us to understand this better today. How much you love us. How much you didn't come to condemn us, but to love us into a life that you've had for us for a long time. And God, help us to live the same way. God, I pray the names that we're going to write on these cards today. And I pray that our lives and their lives of the people we're writing down, that our lives are changed in your name because of how much you love us. God, make us and use us to make an impact in their lives. In your name we pray. Amen.